But they were best pals. Yeah, okay, he doesn't have pals.
Oh, what about Ruth?
Yeah, but look what happened to him. Okay, well, whatever. I mean, they've been through, like, everything together, you know? Man. Okay, well, who gets the job now?
Seitzler.
Who?
Seitzler.
It doesn't ring any bells. All right, see ya. September 25th, 1942. Last week, the battle for the inner city of Stalingrad began. Now, each week, I begin the episode with a hook, something new or gripping or important that happens in the war, right? Well, what more can I say this week? It's still the Battle of Stalingrad. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, a Japanese sub sank an American carrier, but the American Marines on Guadalcanal were reinforced anyhow. The Japanese were defeated both on Guadalcanal and on the Kokoda Trail, and the Axis forces advanced in the Caucasus and began the deadly, brutal, and grinding attacks on the inner city of Stalingrad. The Soviets are, however, making serious attacks of their own. 62nd Army Commander Vasily Chuikov plans his first attack this week to flow from the Mamayev Kurgan towards the central railway station to cut off those German units that are advancing into the city center. It is timed for noon the 19th. Georgy Zhukov's forces are attacking as well, southward from the northwest to try to cut off the invaders and ease pressure on the city. However, the second attack launched by the Stalingrad front with 1st Guards, 66th and 24th Armies, also timed for noon September 19th, failed again. The German bombers duly turned away from Stalingrad, but by the early evening, they gathered in their accustomed numbers over the city, and Chuikov knew the worst. His attack does make some progress, but does not relieve German pressure on the city center. On the 20th, German dive bombers blow up much of what's left of the railway station, and the battalion from Soviet 13th Guards that had been doing the fighting to hold it then cross to the square opposite the station and occupy a building on the corner, which they call the nail factory because they find loads of nails there. They do not have water, and they aren't getting any sleep. That night, the Germans blow up a wall and throw in hand grenades. On the 21st, those that are still alive are split in two forces. The battalion headquarters is now pinned down near the department store Univermag, inside of which hand-to-hand combat with the enemy soon takes place, and where the headquarters staff is killed, while the rest of the battalion pulls back towards the Volga, step by step, with 40 men and a heavy machine gun, occupying a 3-story building on the corner of Krasnopiterskaya and Komsomolskaya, 200 meters from the water. There they hold the rest of the week, destroying a column of Germans and running out of ammunition. Spoiler, tomorrow, German tanks knock the building to the ground. 6 guardsmen will escape the rubble and make it to the river. Okay, that's the micro level. By the 21st, the Germans are behind the railway station in force with armor. But if you think having a bunch of tanks is always an advantage, it's also a death trap for the tank crews sometimes in the narrower streets, as the Soviets allow the panzers to come right on top of them and their anti-tank artillery, then fire away, destroying tanks and isolating infantry. Soviet 62nd Army's left flank is in danger of being turned in the south of the city, where both the German 14th and 24th Panzers are fighting. But the Marines holding the grain elevator down there are somewhat slowing the enemy advance. Thing is, the Soviets have lost the central landing stage on the river, and the Germans who hold it can watch and attack the traffic on the Volga to and from 62nd Army's rear. And that ain't good for Chuikov, and it ain't good for his communications either. Even more serious, the Germans could be expected to push along the Volga bank north and south of the landing stages to slice 62nd Army away from its ferries. Chuikov has gotten some reinforcements again. The 13th Guards have gotten some 2,000 men, and he counterattacks to fix this situation the 23rd, drive the Germans from the central landing stage, and retake the Tsaritsa River Valley. At first light that morning, the 284th Rifle Division, Siberians, crosses the river, and as they make landings, the Germans use incendiary bombs to light oil and set the river on fire, and machine gunners are further up the bank, firing away. A regiment of the Rifles does fight its way up the bank to break them up, though, and then heads on to the southeastern slope of Mamayev Kurgan, still in Soviet 95th Division hands. And at 10 a.m., When Chuikov's counterattack kicks off, the 95th and 284th push the Germans back towards the railway line and the station. They cannot fully clear the enemy from the river, however, or make contact with the troops on the south side of the Tsaritsa. 62nd Army's left flank is still collapsing in the south. In fact, by the end of the week, Soviet resistance in the southern half of the city has mostly collapsed. The Soviets hold the area around Mamayev-Kurgan, a few pockets in the center, and the factories and northern suburbs. And not that much more. So now, Friedrich Paulus, German commander, shifts his attack towards the northern suburbs of the city and the 3 factories south of Rhinoc. These huge concrete and steel structures, the tractor, barricade, and Red October factories, are fortresses, as are the huge apartment blocks of the factory workers. And the steel plant Red October, Krasny Oktyabr, has its own landing stage on the river. In front of the barricade factory and the tractor plant, engineers run an anti-tank line, and lower-level commanders have orders to be ready with mines in case of a German breakthrough to sabotage all the roads and especially the parks. Most important of all of Chuikov's preparations, however, is maintaining the river transport. For without that working, 62nd Army is dead and buried. Today, the order goes out to the whole army that gasoline and ammunition must be stored more than 500 meters from the banks. It must not be blown up and affect river shipping. Although, let's be honest, the Luftwaffe is hitting as much supply as it can on the river, on the east bank, and up to the railway lines there. Red Air Force fighter planes, armored trains, and whatever AA guns the Soviets can find protect the Astrakhan and Verkhny Basunchak railway lines. But the Luftwaffe destroys both railway lines and stations, so trucks drive in supplies from 250 kilometers away, and reinforcements simply march into the city when the rails cannot bring them in. As for the boats on the Volga, there are the gunboats of the Volga River Flotilla to fight the enemy, but the barges and fishing boats doing the ferrying are manned by civilians and under constant fire. 62nd Army is cut off from all other Soviet armies and surrounded on 3 sides, but they have the Volga at their back and the precarious lifeline of the ferries. As the week draws to its close, Chuikov reinforces from the Meshetka River to the Mamayev-Kurgan. 11 German divisions stand before 62nd Army, and they will strike very, very soon. The Axis are striking this week in the Caucasus. Richard Ruoff's 17th Army finally gets going after weeks of inaction on the 23rd with Operation Attica, sending 2 infantry divisions down the Psikups River Valley who make little headway by the week's end. His goal is Tuapse, but that might no longer be feasible, for the Soviets have used the respite to reinforce. Just recently, Adolf Hitler fired Wilhelm List as Army Group A commander and took over personal control of it. The main reason given was his anger and dissatisfaction with the progress of the Caucasus campaign, and he's not any happier this week. The dictator's anger did not stop with one victim. He refused to shake hands or even eat meals with his generals, isolating himself from their advice. Hitler spoke openly of replacing all 3 of his principal assistants, Kyhle and Jodl at OKW and Halder at OKH. Emotionally exhausted, Halder acquiesced and turned over his position to Colonel General Kurt Zeitzler effective September 24th. Yep, Franz Halder, chief of staff since the beginning of the war over 3 years ago, is gone. There are several higher-ranking officers than Zeitzler, but Albert Speer explains perhaps why Hitler chooses Zeitzler over them, for he doesn't go and brood on my orders, but energetically sees to carrying them out. Well, German High Command is not the only one frustrated by lack of success. Kiyotake Kawaguchi failed last week in his attempt to take or destroy Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, and Japanese High Command, again, have a hard time believing it. Thinking at Imperial Headquarters, the Combined Fleet and the 17th Army meshed into a scheme for a concerted effort to regain Guadalcanal and indeed extend Japanese holdings further into the South Pacific. The Naval General Staff now saw Guadalcanal as the chosen site of the anticipated all-out American counterattack. It might be the decisive battle of the war. The Imperial Navy resolved to recapture Guadalcanal and girded itself to meet the total American commitment in kind by tossing in every plane and literally bringing its big guns to bear on the marine perimeter. The Navy asks the Army for ground units, and the Army thinks that since the Soviet-German war looks likely to go on into the winter, they'll see what they can spare and bring it south, even from Manchuria. At Rabaul, 17th Army and 8th Fleet make new plans. Forget Port Moresby. It's all Guadalcanal now. On the 19th, the 8th Central Agreement is issued in Tokyo. It's the plans for Operation KA, the recapture of Guadalcanal, but that's only part of the overall plan. The Navy will cut off the supply of American reinforcements, and then they will also take Rabi, Port Moresby, San Cristobal, and the Russell Islands. 17th Army is beefed up with the 38th Division, who took Hong Kong last December, and the 8th Tank Regiment. The idea is to have all the reinforcements in place by October 14th, so they can attack the 20th. 6 transports will bring them in, and Harukichi Hyakutake expects both air and artillery support from the combined fleet. Some of the admirals balk at this since they don't want to expose their carriers to land-based aircraft, but by the end of the week, Combined Fleet Commander Isoroku Yamamoto is convinced. As for the American Marines on the island itself, on the 19th, they revised their deployment since they now have 10 battalions of infantry, a raider battalion, and a tank and several artillery battalions. So they set up now a full perimeter defense. They haven't done this before, and actually, Richard Frank points out that doing so goes against all the principles of modern warfare. Building a long, thinly defended line, which is totally vulnerable to an enemy that masses its force against one point. But Marine Commander Alexander Vandegrift and his staff throw that out the window. They figure that their pilots and planes prevent a landing on the seaward side of the perimeter, and since the Japanese seem in favor of unopposed landings and then assaults over land, and they figure that's going to continue, and since attacks from the south across the jungle would likely be unsupplyable and impossible, they'll prepare for attacks from the east or west at crossing points on the Tenaru or Matanacao rivers. The critical issue in defensive arrangements is usually reserves, and here, the Marine plan favored practical reality over theoretical elegance. The cordon defense allowed a degree of economy of force, both because it permitted unusually long frontage assignments and because Marine Command could thin to the bone unthreatened sectors. The Japanese are still bringing in supplies to their own men on the island, though. Well, they have to eat, you know. On the 20th, 4 destroyers towing barges, and on the 21st, 4 destroyers make runs to Kamimbo. These are attacked by SBD planes, and the second run has to head back still carrying a third of its supplies. On the 24th comes another run with 280 infantrymen and construction equipment. The planes damage 2 destroyers and kill 14 men, and although that all so far doesn't sound like it's a ton of damage, the pilots are getting ever better at night flying and attacking, and the full moon is soon to come. Shintaro Hashimoto, who commands what the Marines refer to as the Tokyo Express, cancels all supply runs for the rest of the month. As for Kawaguchi, his force is recovering from last week's defeat. He gets word the 24th from Japanese intel that it's very possible the Allies will attempt a landing between Matanacao and Kamimbo, so he sends a bunch of his units to man the high ground on the coast to fight off any landing. The next day, he gets orders to take points on the east bank of the Matanacao so he can bring artillery close enough to shell Henderson Field. This, of course, conflicts with the orders to prevent a landing. He does have other problems, though he is not yet aware of it, as a detachment of the 7th Marines heads out the 23rd to cross the Matanacao and prevent the Japanese from establishing themselves within attack range of the perimeter. So the Allies are going to go over to the offensive there, and that's not the only place. On the Kokoda Trail, they will as well. American reinforcements land at Port Moresby, and Australian Commander Thomas Blamey is now in personal charge with orders from Douglas MacArthur to simply get the job done. And here are a couple of notes to end the week. On the 23rd in Madagascar, British troops take the capital, Tananarive, from the Vichy French. And that same day, Erwin Rommel heads from North Africa to Germany for medical treatment. He is suffering from exhaustion and has a liver infection. Georg Stumme takes over his command in his absence. And this week of the war comes to an end, with brutal close-quarter fighting in Stalingrad bringing parts of the city under Axis control, even as the Soviets bring in ever more reinforcements. The Japanese plans for retaking Guadalcanal grow ever larger, but it is the Allies that are to go on the offensive. And Franz Halder is no longer chief of the General Staff. He has been Hitler's close sidekick this whole war, though lately their relations have grown more and more strained. It was Halder who planned and directed Barbarossa. Halder who issued the Commissar Order and Barbarossa Decree, directing enormous war crimes and crimes against humanity in the East. Halder who directed Operation Typhoon. And Halder who's been keeping his diary this whole time, excerpts from which I've read once in a while. You can actually read all 6 volumes of his war diary, 1939 to 1942, in English online. It's easy enough to find. The final entry is for September 24th, 1942. It reads, "After situation conference, farewell by the Führer. My nerves are worn out. Also, his nerves are no longer fresh. We must part. Necessity for educating the General Staff in fanatical faith in the idea. He is determined to enforce his will also in the army." Franz Halder was very much part of the war against humanity. That is also the title of a sub-series we have here that comes out every other week that goes over the atrocities committed across the globe during this war. There was no clean Wehrmacht, contrary to Halder's post-war revisionist claims. The evidence is overwhelming, and you can see more about that right here. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Juuso Kihlström. It is Army members like Juuso that make it possible for us to do the work we do. So join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com so we can continue to do it. See you next time.